Down the Biscayne.
Yikes. 5 on the floor, ride for my dogs. Where here's the thing, you can check the score. Hustle hard, couple scars, wearing bubble frogs.
Down the Biscayne.
Kept the floor playing, got it all band. Y'all seen the block, stop with one hand. And Pat we trust, it's about have the guts. We're here to bring the heat, y'all can hang it up.
Welcome to 5 on the Floor, a daily insider show on the Miami Heat and the NBA, featuring Ethan Skolnick, Greg Sylvander, Alex Toledo, Brady Hawk, and others from the 5 Reasons Sports Network. Also, make sure to subscribe to Off the Floor for the most heat anywhere.
All right, welcome back to 5 on the Floor Live here on the 5 Reasons YouTube channel. We'll line up a new video here soon. I'm Ethan Skolnick. You can follow me at Ethan J. Skolnick on 5 Reasons Sports. Got Alex Toledo. You can follow him at Tropical Blanket. We got Brady Hawk. You can follow him at Brady Hawk 305. We got Greg Sylvander. You can follow him at Greg Sylvander. Today's floor plan, we're going to dissect another fourth quarter collapse. The Miami Heat go into Oklahoma City against the best team in the league, the team that's been, a title favorite at this point, never loses at home. Dominates most of the first 3 quarters, comes out in the fourth and scores 8 points. And this is now 2 straight games that they have not cracked double digits in the fourth quarter. And this is with a slightly different cast of characters. This one cannot be blamed on Terry Rozier, who missed the game with a stomach bug. This is now their first loss without Rozier playing this season. This is obviously with some of the new players, Davion Mitchell and Andrew Wiggins playing. No Kyle Anderson tonight. But to me, and Brady, I want to go to you first on this because the conversation is going to be about the coach. This is where this is headed right now. We know that this team does not have championship talent. Nobody is arguing that. They are setting up a build to try to bring in somebody to lead it. We're going to talk about Tyler Hero tonight as well because he has really struggled since the All-Star nod. But here's where I'm at with it, and you tell me if I'm wrong, okay? If you're going to beat a team like this on the road, you got to coach the game different. You can't coach it just like every other game and leave key parts who've been instrumental in getting you the lead on the bench at key points in the game. And we called this on playback. Like, we're watching playback. We're like, this thing's going to get away. He's putting Bam on the bench. By the time Bam comes in, this thing is going to get away from them. It got away from them. They were going to end up with a double-digit loss. They ended up with a double-digit loss. I know you can't say Bam's going to play 48 minutes. I get it. But on a night like tonight, don't you have to lean into it if you're going to beat a team like that when you're against the crowd, you're against the officials, you're against a team with an elite MVP-level talent? Can you coach it just like any other game? Because it felt like he did.
No, not only because of the team you're playing, but the situation that you're in. Like, you need that type of win. When you're up like you were, with the situation that they dealt with all season, with the fact they're integrating new players, like, they needed this one tonight, just for a morale standpoint, for a lot of different reasons, just because they had it in hand. When you talk about the way of coaching this type of game, I thought he was coaching it in the first half like it did matter. Jaime was available. He did not play. He leaned into some of the other guys. He leaned into a certain rotation that I think makes sense. Obviously, Terry was out and no Jaime, I think, and they leaned in some more defense. But I'll say this, other than the Bam thing, I think the other thing that is notable in the second half is just the substitution patterns in general. Like, Tyler Quickston comes out. They go to a lineup with pretty much all defense, which has looked decent. Like, the defensive lineup was not the problem. It actually was pretty good. But that leaves you into these other lineups where you are lacking defense, where you're almost leaning into these other groupings that I just wasn't a fan of. And then they cut it to, it was a 10-point game at the end of the third quarter and the start of the fourth. It was just, they just hit an offensive wall. And it felt like there was an inevitable moment there where everybody knew which way the game was going. And it just felt like we were all watching it with Spo. like we were watching the game go in that direction. And there was just no change of lines, no change of anything, where it felt like once it got to, like, I think they hit a 3, and it was, even when it got to 7, I think they should have pulled Bam back in just to see. And it doesn't have to be for the rest of, the game. We can see where the game goes from there, but you try and see what you can spark up at that point, try to get it back to like 10, 12, try to see what you could do. But once they got momentum of this game in their building, you're not going to stop that team once they get into that type of flow. And it doesn't help, like, the one lineup that you're anchoring there is Tyler. and Tyler just doesn't have it going right now. Like Tyler was just, and not to make excuses for him, I don't know if it has something to do with the stomach bug. He just landed in OKC today. I don't really know what that situation is, but he just was not good enough in this game. So it's tough to say. I just think we have to start talking about kind of these rotations. We've talked about Terry, the context of Terry, but there was no Terry tonight. But I think what we saw in the first 3 quarters is that I think there's a certain rotation he's going to have to lean into here, where there's no feelings, there's no leaning into developmental things with young guys. You play your best guys. I think we saw that at certain points, but the lineups and the substitution pattern just had to be better the second half.
Mute.
Okay. To that end, Greg, and we'll probably do longer episodes on this, but I think they got to decide what the rest of the season is about. And I think the coach is part of that. Like this season so far, and I do not want to belabor the guy who's gone at this point, but this season so far has been about him. Okay, it's been about, how are we getting past him? What's this group going to look like once he's gone? Okay, now they're in a position where like they could get out of the play-in. These teams above them are not that far above them, and they're not going to slip out of the play-in because the teams that are beneath them in the play-in are not that good. And even Philadelphia can't get itself right. That was the one team we thought could kind of sneak out of that bottom 5 into the play-in. So they're stuck probably in the play-in somewhere. All right. So we've talked about playing the young guys, giving them experience and all that, but it's like there's kind of going halfway with it again.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I like them playing Burks tonight because Burks is a solid enough player. Burks gave him 11 points and 9 rebounds tonight in 28 minutes. He only made 1 3, and he still made a positive impact for most of his minutes tonight. Again, he was in there for part of it. It fell apart. But to me, when you have a chance to win a defining game like this, a game that would have made you feel really good going into the break, regardless of what happens tomorrow in Dallas, and Dallas is without all of its bigs tomorrow, okay? That's another reason why I'm like, if Bam's having that night, if he's having that night, he ended up with 27, 15, and 4 and 11 of 19 shooting. He made his first 3 threes until he missed a garbage one at the end. If he's having that night, you're not facing any good bigs tomorrow in Dallas. They're all out. Just roll with him. Like, why is he on 35 minutes? Like, shouldn't he be playing? Play him the 40 tonight if that's going to get them over the hump. Do they win the game? I don't know. But to me, as soon as they were on the bench at the start of the fourth quarter and things started to get away, you knew they were losing. Like, this absolutely guaranteed a loss.
It even came earlier than that. I feel like at halftime when they were only up 11, when they got it up to 21, and I remember 60-40 was the score at one point. It was down to 11 at halftime, and immediately, like, this was a team, and I mentioned this on playback, Oklahoma City goes on these, like, what I call them avalanche runs, where they just will pummel you, and 32-8.
Yeah. Yep.
32-8 in the fourth quarter. Like, what are we doing there? Like that, the blown leads with this team throughout this season is something that we're going to need to study. And that'll be part of the postmortem after this season, because it's been, no matter who's on the court, they find a way. They were at 20 something, 22 in Orlando and blew the lead in the fourth quarter. This is another game where they had, I thought, one of the best, most spirited first quarters in a really long time. I can't remember the last time that they looked that good and connected. And then for it to just, be basically erased the way that it was, it's a weird season. And when you talk about what are they going to make out of this year, I think it's about figuring out which pieces fit and also seeing where Bam and Tyler ultimately land this season. Tyler needs to obviously get back to the efficient basketball that he was playing earlier. And it looks like Bam is finally becoming himself, but it's not enough right now. And you're right. Like, Coach Spo is going to start to hear it more and more. It's going to get louder, particularly if Terry gets back in the rotation, and he was out tonight sick.
I think the thing with Spo, and we're going to get to the player of the game here, and then Alex is going to go to you on that. I think the thing with Spo that there's like a dichotomy here, because I think in some ways he did a good enough job keeping the team together during the chaos, right? Like, it doesn't seem like the other players quit on the situation. But the game-to-game, minute-to-minute management this year has just backfired. We can talk, it's just a process results thing, right? The results have not been good. Okay. And I think most people will tell you about coaching, as long as the process is good, like you can't really control the results in a lot of situations. It's a make or miss league, all of that. You can't guarantee how players are going to perform. But there's just been too many games this year where he's had some good like out of timeout plays and some stuff like that, which we've spotlighted. But there's been too many games this year where been like we can pinpoint specific points in the game where things could have gone differently with a different decision that some of us were calling as we're watching the game being streamed, and it doesn't happen, and the end result is predictable. It's predictable. Like you knew they were not, like you mentioned the Avalanche. And I've covered games in that building. Okay. When that team is good, okay, whether they had the Durant, Westbrook, Harden, Ibaka teams or these teams, that is the toughest building to get it back at in the league. It really is, because the fans are on top of you. It's the way that the arena is structured, and they play with such speed, like that team did, that it just takes over you. And that's where you need quicker timeout, quicker substitution, that kind of stuff. You cannot. He knows this. He's coached dozens of dozen plus games there, plus the finals. Okay, he knows this. And I just seemed like tonight, like it was just like, all right, we're just going to go with our normal thing, and then we're going to see how it works out. We saw how it worked out. All right, Alex, let's get to the player of the game.
And now it's time for the A Aggressive Insurance Player of the Night, sponsored by our friend Lynette. You can find her at insurancebylynette.com. That's with 2 N's and 2 T's, insurancebylynette.com. If you need car insurance, renter's insurance, homeowner's insurance, or any other type of insurance, she's the person to go to. Based in Lauderhill, she services the entire Tri-County area here in South Florida, and she will make sure to get you the best deal. She'll probably talk to you about the heat while you're at it. Reach out to her, insurancebylynette.com. And now, the player of the game.
I want to do something a little differently here. The player of the game is Shea. Shea's inevitable. He scores 32. You know he's going to get there, whether it's the foul calls, the 8 free throws in the first quarter. He's going to get to 32 points eventually. He ends up with 30 to 32 in every game, unless he ends up with 40. But I want to ask you specifically to grade the 2 new players. I think that's more interesting to do here. So let's go through it. Wiggins, 4 of 12, 13 points, 4 rebounds, 3 assists. Davion Mitchell, 35 minutes, which, by the way, tied with Bam for the team lead. 6 of 10, 14 points, 1 rebound, 3 assists. What did you think of both of them?
I mean, you saw them much closer to kind of like the role that you were expecting of them, right? With Tyler back in the mix. And even though Tyler didn't have an awesome game himself, I think it kind of clears up what they should and shouldn't do. And I think you saw the flashes from Wiggins. I don't think he had, like, the shooting numbers aren't great, but you saw flashes of what he can give you. Like, he can hit the open 3. He can be athletic and get you a paint touch. He had kind of like the mid-post touches that I thought were very interesting. That's stuff that they used to do a lot of in Minnesota, I want to say, or like when they would actually run plays for him to get, to be a scorer. And I think that was kind of stuff that we were talking about when they acquired him, is like, how do they find that mix of him, the Warriors player, and the Timberwolves player, as far as getting him involved in the offense. I think you're seeing them trying to work through it. I think, honestly, I think they could have gone to Tyler more throughout this game, but he was, the Thunder probably have the best defense in the league. They've got positive defenders at every position, even on their bench. They don't really have liabilities anywhere. And I thought, Hero was just being run off the line and facing a ton of pressure. So I don't blame him for having a tough game versus a defense like the Thunder, but he was, I thought he wasn't, he had like stretches in the game where he was good, but he wasn't the Hero that you've seen all season, where he's just constantly leaving the tone. And I think it wasn't even a problem until later on in the game when they ran out of offense, because that's really what it was. You guys have already touched on it, but they really, they really put a lid on Shea and Jalen Williams in that first half. And for some reason, like, the Heat were just awesome in the paint and the Thunder weren't, right? Like, all of that completely flipped in the second half. So I think Wiggins and Mitchell, like, they did their part when it comes to what they show on the defensive end, right? I think Mitchell had the stronger game. He was kind of, he had a better shooting game and all that. But you saw, like, the vision of what this team can be. They really, like, went full on into defense there. And I think once the Thunder kind of got going, like you guys mentioned, the Avalanche, they didn't really turn back. Like the stats between the first half versus the second half are staggering. Like there's some huge differences, and maybe I'll get into that later. But I just think in general, Wiggins and Mitchell, like you saw the flashes of what they can do. And I think we already saw like their offense is very limited, and at some point they run out of it. You know, when you play an elite defense like that, they just run out of offense. I don't really think it's Mitchell or Wiggins' fault. But they were also missing Duncan as well when it comes to an offensive player. So, you know, I will give them both probably. I think Mitchell A- and Wiggins B+ for this game, even with the tough shooting. You could say B at worst, but you saw the flashes of what he can be.
Brady, we saw a rotation without Rozier tonight. And Mitchell played 35 minutes. They leaned into Burks more so than Larson. Jaquez and Duncan. Jaquez available, Duncan not available. When they're all available, do you think he just plugs Terry right back in? Because I kind of feel like if they'd won this game, then you talked about it. Like this was the excuse, right? Like Terry doesn't play. They have success. We're going to stick with what works. Well, then it's harder to make that argument. Not that he should have to explain it to anybody. He should do it just to do it. But it's harder to make that argument when you score 8 points in the fourth quarter.
It's tough because I still think they could use the excuse, to be honest. I kind of said, like, with the good trends they had through the first 3 quarters and scoring 93 points through 3 quarters, they could say, well, we want to build off that and we want to make the tweaks that we didn't make in the fourth quarter. And Terry, you know, you're outside the rotation and just stay ready kind of thing. Like, I think that's still a possibility that they could do that. Obviously, you know, we've all talked about that they should do that, but it's more so I think there's an actual reality here that they could lean into this. As I said, I thought this was the correct rotation in a lot of ways. Like, I think they leaned into the right guys. As we said, more Burks. With the acquisitions they made, they need to play Burks, to be honest. They need some type of shooting and offense on the outside, and you think you saw that. When Duncan's back, obviously, he's going to be in the mix. As for Tyler, it's funny because when they first started the season and had him trying to work off the ball and they had this kind of game plan, it was based off of the fact that they had Terry Rozier playing at a level that he was late last season. Like, that's what they had in mind coming into this season. So the only way you could really do it fully is lean into Tyler off the ball, is if you have that player on the ball that can really demand things and be a creator. Mm-hmm. I don't see that on the roster right now. So it's much harder to do that specific role that they talked about on media day and training camp and all that stuff. So it's had to lean into more stuff with Tyler on the ball. And I'm almost questioning if they should almost let him take a few more mid-ranges right now just to try to get into a flow before All-Star break. Like, trying to let him see. Once again, I said, like, I don't know if this was a thing with the stomach bug or if this is like a layover, because this has been a few games where he's kind of struggled with this type of attention. And this is obviously a really good defense, but I'm just interested to see in the way they treat it, because I don't think they're going to lean into Andrew Wiggins super on the ball as we've seen. It's going to be post catches. It's just going to be like an elevated version of like Jaime's role, like catch and goes, Jaime's role of last year, basically, like the mid post stuff, the catch and goes, the occasional threes, all that stuff, just a higher usage version. But he's not going to be somebody that's demanding on the ball like Tyler. So it's going to be interesting. Once again, they didn't have offensive problems for majority of this game, so it's not like they have to make like full fixes. It's just about what's been the case all season. They are super inconsistent. They cannot find consistency on either end of the floor or with anything that they do, or with any player. Like, there's just a lack of consistency, whereas you have a team like OKC where every single time they made a run and Miami was countering early in the game, you knew eventually they were going to get over the top on it because they kept making those counters. Like, they have a consistent effort on both ends of the floor, and that's why they're such a good basketball team.
This game comes in from Big Brad 310. We appreciate the super chat. We're now 8-13 and 26 in net rating since the Jimmy lost his joy game. I don't think it's fair to call the team mid at this point. To be determined on how much Wiggins and Mitchell can help. I think a couple of things can be true here, and then we'll get to the play of the game. I think the first thing that can be true is the talent on this roster right now, at best, is average. Okay, from where they are at their collective stages of development, I think there is potential for it to be more. And again, when you bring in if you ever do, a star to lead it, I think there's enough pieces here to work with to put yourself back in pretty good position. I don't think we have anything close to finished products for a lot of these players. And again, that's not going to be a straight line because we saw it with Jaquez this year that he did not take the leap that was expected. In fact, he went backwards, and that's going to happen with some guys, game to game, night to night, season to season. That is going to happen. But I think it's fair to say that they don't have better than an average roster with where they are at this current stage. And at the same time, I do think they need a few days in the lab to try to figure things out. I think it's both. Okay. I think they can be better than this if Spoelstra can get his handle on what guys do well and what positions to put them in. You're asking, players to join like a speeding train in the middle of the season, and you're giving them heavy minutes. Like Wiggins has obviously won a title. He's done, some things in the league. He was the number 1 overall pick. But I mean, you're giving Davion Mitchell 35 minutes as a starter in his second game with the team. Like, this is a lot to ask these guys to know who wants the ball where do you go in certain situations, and all of that. So I think there's a little grace that should be given for that. At the same time, as I think it's fair to say that the coach has had a very uneven season, and I think that's generous at this point. Okay. Just with the product that's been on the floor and how it's been utilized. And I think that I think that they need some time to figure it out, but I don't even know that when they figure it out that the upside this season is going to be that high. All right, let's get to the play of the day. And then Greg, I got a couple things to get to you with.
And now it's time for the X-Ray of the Play of the Day, brought to us by our friends over at Mobile C-Arm and Staffing Services. Nelson and his team will bring the X-ray equipment and the staffing to you. If you work in a hospital or a medical office, get a consultation today at c-armandstaffing.com or give them a call at 561-891-9620. Their fleet of trucks at your service. Again, it's Mobile C-Arm and Staffing Services, 561-891-9620. And now, the X-Ray of the Play of the Day.
I mean, should we do the Jovic kick? That way he left his feet.
I felt like the Jovic alley-oop to Bam was like a really fun play early on, but like now to talk about it feels silly because we saw how that game ended.
Yeah, I thought Nico's game was also kind of indicative of where they're at. Like, there are moments he looks really comfortable, shot looks pure, makes good decisions, sees the floor, and there's other sequences where he looks 21. I mean, that's kind of where they're at. Like, this is when you lean young, this is what you're going to get. Then you're going to get some moments where but I think this is the biggest thing, Greg, and this is why as we talk about the future build and where they end up going, is that they need, and I don't want to talk about the other guy that much anymore because the other guy again was not with them mentally, emotionally, or and a lot of times physically this season. But they need someone who can settle the game, and I just don't think they have that right now. They don't. It's harder when Bam's on the bench, okay? But again, that's been something we've asked him to do more over time, and sometimes he hasn't done it. But Tyler is getting played differently than he's gotten played previously, and he's not reacted to it well so far. And you just don't have anybody just grab the reins of the game. Like Shea grabbed the reins of the game today. Like that's what you need that guy for. And we're going to be in this perpetual state of giving away games at the end until they find that guy, and that guy probably is not on the roster for this season. Just that simple.
Yeah. And that's so you have to treat it like a transition year. You have to adjust the expectations to some degree. There's no way that you trade Jimmy Butler and still have the same aspirations that you had, before when you had Jimmy Butler. I know that it was a different version of Jimmy, but it signifies that you're going in a different direction. And I just think you have to reemphasize that. It sucks because as you lean into young players, you're going to have these type of nights where they look great and then things fall apart. I feel like it's happened a little bit too much with this group, but you're right. And you hit on this after the trade deadline about kind of what they're building toward. And basically they need to build a team that has all of the structure in place so that somebody can come in and take the reins and lead it somewhere. And that's just what they don't have quite yet. And we'll see how they address that. But for now, you have to kind of look for the small wins in finding Davion Mitchell and seeing what he can be. Tyler Hero, to your point, he has to be another guy that figures out a way to settle them. Like if Bam is going to be one of those players, Tyler has to do that as well. He's being paid as such. It doesn't help that he hasn't really found a backcourt partner that works perfectly yet, but maybe there, can be more chemistry with Mitchell than there's been with Rozier, at least defensively. So we'll see where it goes, but adjusting expectations is where we're at.
All right, Alex, I want to touch on the defense before we close here. So let's play that and let you and I chat about that.
And now it's time for our Defending the House segment, sponsored by our friends over at The Real Estate Shop. You can find them at realestateshopfl.com. That's with 2 P's and an E, realestateshopfl.com, or at the Fort Lauderdale Realtor on Instagram. This is Javier Iglesias and Amanda Martin. They help buyers and sellers in real estate. They're nimble and protective of their clients. They service the entire Tri-County area. That's Miami-Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach counties with a proven on-market strategy. The Real Estate Shop sellers earn the most money in the shortest time frame because Amanda and Javier have a deep understanding of the local market. So check them out. Again, it's at the Fort Lauderdale Realtor on Instagram, realestateshopfl.com, or give them a call at 954-268-9812. And now, who defended the house?
I want to flip this, Alex, if I can, because I know we've talked a lot about defense. How should they, the way that Tyler is being defended, because they are, look, if he doesn't figure this thing out offensively, they're going to go through games where they're going to struggle to get over 100 on a consistent basis. How do they free him, or how does he free himself? Is this simply a product of him hitting a slump, or is this about the way that he's being played and the way that he's reacted to it?
I mean, I'm not sure about the slump part. I think 3-point shooting in general, there's a lot of variance with it. And I think when you go against teams that have a lot of really good perimeter defenders, you're not finding a lot of openings in general. On or off ball. I think he's more prone to shooting nights like this. So I'm not really trying to excuse it. I just think it's more predictable when you're talking about a team that relies on him so much. And again, like they were able to score at a fine level in that first half because they were getting so much of the paint, and that completely, went the other way in the second half. And I know the question's about Tyler, but I think that's really like what was the biggest difference between the first half and the second half. Like I was looking at the numbers, and the Heat shot 21 of 29 in the first half on twos, which is 72%. When you look at that same stat for the second half, 4 of 16.
Oh my gosh.
21 made field goals from 2 in the first half, 4 in the second half. Like that's really what this came down to. I think the Thunder defense really, just did a much better job of guarding the paint. And as far as Tyler himself, like it's been talked about already. We've talked about it. The coach and Tyler himself have talked about it. Like teams are trying to run him off. Sometimes they're going to send 2 at him. He is always the one facing the most pressure. So I think like he's going to do his thing in most games, but in the moments that he's not, right? If the Heat are not hot from 3 in that moment, a lot of times throughout the season, it hasn't gone well. That was why the first half was so refreshing, because they didn't make many threes at all in the first half, and neither did the Thunder, but it didn't really matter because the Heat were doing their thing in the paint. Now, obviously, I don't know if that level of output that they had is necessarily sustainable game by game, but I think like you saw the vision of like, okay, when this team really battens down the hatches on defense and plays just like mistake-free basketball on both ends, there's a path to them winning games. Now, of course, like I'm with what everybody's saying. Like in general, I think it's fair to say the team is mid, but you know what? Like they were in a point this game where they could have won. And honestly, like they had a really good start versus Boston too, and things kind of went off the rails. Obviously, without Tyler, like they had kind of no chance. It was already a small chance in itself. But I think like there is too much pressure on Tyler to do his thing tonight. I thought you saw Nico, be another guy who could help, and you've seen it throughout, points throughout the season. For him, it's about, I think, being more consistent at this point. And like I mentioned at the top of the show, I think if Burks had a nice game. But if you have Duncan instead of Burks there, maybe the offense flows a little better with the actions that they run for him. So I think you could look at it different ways, but there's, I think, too much of the offense at the end of the day, since I haven't said that in a while, falls on Tyler. And I think it's a result of the roster construction. And that's why I've been saying just lean into the defense, because that's really your only path to winning, man.
All right, we're going to close it there. Appreciate everybody for joining here on live tonight. Dallas tomorrow to close the first half. Heat now 2 games under 500. We'll be back on playback tomorrow. The only thing they got going for them is that the East is not very good. Look, they just played the 2 teams that will likely, it looks like it. I think these are 2 teams that will likely meet in the finals this year.
Mhm.
They were competitive for stretches against both for a bit. And like you said, more tonight than against Boston, where then it started to get away earlier. But they need to get in the lab over All-Star break, and he needs to figure out some rotations that fit, find some roles that fit. Needs to get away from things a little bit quicker if they don't work out. And I think he needs to look at his own season. I just don't think again. There's been some good management of the circumstances behind the scenes, which he deserves credit for. But on court this year, there's just been too many games where it's like, you don't know what the goal is here. You don't know what the goal is here. And I think they need to sort that out before they go anywhere else. All right, Greg, Brady, Alex, appreciate it. Thanks to our sponsors, c-armandstaffing.com, insurancebythenet.com, real estate shop, fl.com. We'll have plenty of coverage for you even during All-Star weekend. I'm going to bring on some guests. We'll evaluate kind of where the Heat are going in the future beyond this season as well. Thanks, everybody, for joining. Appreciate it. Join us on Off the Floor, the Discord, link right here in the description.